night in 1912, RMS Titanic struck an iceberg and slipped beneath the waves into the middle of the North Atlantic. Now, on a night where the immersion in the water, the icy water, was a death sentence, the words people lived and died by were women and children first. Now, on a not-so-cold night in 2012, the cruise ship Costa Concordia struck a rock about a football field's length from shore. On a night where immersion in that water meant infinitely better chances of survival, the words people lived and died by were, "Get out of my way." My friends Steve Green and Scott Ott join me now from Colorado and Pennsylvania. Gentlemen, in the century since the Titanic went down, progressives have wrought incalculable changes on our society. Steve, in the morning hours of April 16th, 1912, people in London and New York were able to reconcile themselves to the unimaginable horror of that evening with what I think is the greatest example of civilized heroism in human history. That's why the Titanic rings such a bell with us. We didn't get that same sense in the morning after the Costa Concordia ran aground, did we? So what changed, Steve, since then?
Let me preface this by saying that in a very limited sense, men are dispensable. If it comes down to the survival of the species, one healthy man can take care of a lot of women. Maybe not very well, but he can get the job done to continue the species. But to have a society, men are indispensable. But you know what? Society, it doesn't treat us that way anymore. The welfare state says we aren't needed to take care of families. Modern divorce laws can cost us our families on a whim, literally. Male, masculine characteristics are supposed to be points of shame now, and so we end up with men who behave accordingly. They're boys, really. They dress and they act like children their entire lives, and when push comes to shove, like it did on the ship, apparently push really did come to shove. It's shameful, but I guess you reap what you sow.
It's shameful. I want to come back to that in a minute. Scott, we three are all about equal opportunities and equal pay for women, but I know you two well enough to say that we three would also live and die by the credo, women and children first, if it ever came to that. So what's the difference between equal pay and unequal seating at a lifeboat in icy waters?
Well, there's fairness and justice in how you treat people, and you treat people of equal skills with equal rewards. There's no question about that, although there used to be a question about that. But there's something different going on here, and I think I want to piggyback on what Steve said. There was also at that time, 100 years ago, a greater sense of our accountability for our life in the eyes of God. And I think the progressive movement has taken away a lot of that as well. When you know that you're going to have to stand before your maker and give an accounting of the life that you led, you're much less likely to push a pregnant woman out of the way so you can jump into the lifeboat, and you're more willing to trust yourself to the grace of God, even if that means your own death. I think we've lost that, and the man, as the protector of women and children, to lose that means to lose society itself.
Yeah, as we're finding out daily. Gents, in the many moments of shame that surround the Costa Concordia disaster, we have yet again, because this kind of thing's happened before and recently, the spectacle of the captain being one of the first off the ship and then being ordered back onto his command by irate members, in this case, of the Italian Coast Guard. More than one commentator has been reminded of this famous scene from the show Seinfeld. That's one of the greatest moments in TV comedy, but it's not so funny when your life and your family's lives are in the hands of the man knocking kids and old ladies down to get out the door. When the Titanic went down, Captain Smith, the man responsible for charging her through an ice field at full speed, stayed on a ship until it sank beneath her. His sense of duty was motivated by his sense of shame. The owner of the Titanic, Bruce Ismay, let his will to live overcome his sense of shame and took a seat in a lifeboat that might have saved the life of a woman or child that perished in those icy waters. And for that, he lived in misery and disgrace for the rest of his life. And I'm convinced there was not a night when he did not regret his choice. So, Steve, progressives tell us that shame is bad. I don't think shame is bad. I think shame is the essential component of civilized behavior. We didn't see a lot of shame on this most recent case, did we?
No, we sure saw a lot of shameful behavior, though. One is what prevents the other. And, you know, I think I have a clue where it went, because when you brought this up on the phone yesterday, I thought immediately of the master, Robert Heinlein, a little something from the Notebooks of Lazarus Long that I'm going to read you. He said, whenever women have insisted on absolute equality with men, they have invariably wound up with the dirty end of the stick. What they are and what they do makes them superior to men. And their proper tactic is to demand special privileges all the traffic will bear. They should never settle merely for equality. For women, equality is disaster.
Well, there you go. Steve Green can be read at vodkapundit.com. Scott, you have both sons and daughters. Do you worry that this flood, actually this torrent of action movies showing 90-pound women like Scarlett Johansson routinely beating the crap out of 250-pound security guards, not only gives girls a dangerously false sense of their physical strength relative to men, but also de-inhibits this women and children first response that is inculcated in men in order to protect the weak and the vulnerable?
It's happening everywhere, and it's amazing how many movies that I've seen where there's always this twist at the end where, in effect, the woman winds up rescuing the man. And it happens over and over, and every time I see it, there was a great movie, I can't remember, it was a Disney movie, it may have been called Enchanted or something like that, where that twist happened at the end, and it was the woman falling into the or the man falling into the arms of the rescuing woman. You know, there was one case in this shipwreck, though, that we should point out. There was a guy named Francine Servel, a Frenchman, who was 71 years old. He gave his life jacket to his 61-year-old wife and coaxed her to jump into the water when she wouldn't leave the ship. And he said, "Don't worry, I'm going to be fine." And that's the last she saw of him. He saved her life, sacrificially giving up his own.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, if the man was 71 years old, I had no doubt he did it. What if he was 17 years old? Would he have done it? He's closer to the Titanic than he is to the Concordia in terms of when he was born. This is something to be really worried about. You can catch Scott Ott's remarkable Freedoms Charter right here at PJTV. My friends, the difference between the events on the nights of 1912 and 2012 are the reason I'm a conservative. When women were deprived of the right to vote and did not get equal pay for equal work, I would be a liberal. But when I'm told that they are as fast and as strong as men and need no protection from unprincipled, cowardly men, then I become a conservative. Morality and manhood, for that matter, consists of doing the right thing over the smart thing. Women and children first is the essence of civilization, and I say this only to the radical feminists out there who think that they can destroy that sense of honor and obligation in men at cocktail parties in Manhattan, only to call it up when the ship is going down. It doesn't work that way. You destroy that magnificent sense of self-sacrifice at your peril, and your peril does not always come at night on a dark sea. It may come in an alleyway or a parking structure, and when it does, you had better hope to God that your screams for help are answered by men who have been above the reach of your political message. For the entire Trifecta team, I'm Bill Whittle.
So, as you can see, the title of this video is Anti-Feminist Misandry. And this is to highlight, the title of this is to highlight the fact that not everyone who is anti-feminist is pro-male. And by pro-male life, in this case, all I'm talking about merely is treating male life as being no less valuable than female life. So obfuscators aside, no one can listen to these three and use the excuse that the men's movement hasn't defined what a traditionalist is. Feast your eyes, gentlemen. This is what a traditionalist looks like. And this video's purpose is to add to the mounting evidence that traditionalism is not merely the dominant social narrative predating feminism, but feminism's predecessor having its same goals, and that is, of course, the extraction of male productivity for the benefit of women. Now, the subject matter of this video will undoubtedly draw several generic non sequiturs and protests along the general lines of, expecting women to be treated as equal to men as possible, both legally and socially speaking, amounts somehow, according to them, to believing there are no differences between men and women. These videos and this channel isn't about pretending men and women are the same. They're clearly not, and this channel has addressed that thoroughly in the past. But with that said, women have continuously encroached upon male territories with impunity, and they've done it for the last time. And as such, they will be treated the same way men are. After all, men are not the same homogeneous group of equal skill, intelligence, and ability, yet we still live in a man's world with the same general rule sets and customs, and so should women. You see, nobody's going to extend to men that aren't stronger, physically speaking, or more intelligent than other men a handout in life. You as a man have the responsibility to learn your strengths, to play to them, and to work on your weaknesses as best you can. And that's it. There's no safety nets. There's no nothing. In fact, there are just as many weak men as there are strong men, maybe even more so. And there are just as many dim-witted men as there are intelligent men. So, quite frankly, I don't give a damn about differences in the intellectual and physical capacities between men and women. Yes, these differences exist. They exist amongst men too. And yet somehow men deal without society bending over backwards to accommodate their respective disparities, don't they? It's time that women exist in that world as well. And another point I want to address before we start the general meat of this video is that we often find in traditionalist and feminist thought streams the concept of the real man, which Stardust has recently dissected excellently in one of his last videos. We're not real men and we're not good men, we're just men. And in terms of what an authentic man or a so-called good man is supposed to be, I posit this specifically to the traditionalists like the ones you just saw, who claim that men that don't follow his guidelines of manliness are mere boys. And also feminist and traditionalist women who whine on about the lack of, quote, good men. The good men mantra is another non sequitur, considering that the definition of good doesn't change based on gender, and if honor exists, being honorable is being honorable. Being, quote, good isn't going to change based on genitalia. Thus, to be good is apparently, according to how we apply the word to women these days, is also to be selfish, to be greedy, and to be self-interested, and the list goes on. Because that, my friends, is how we classify women, no matter their avarice, no matter their tendencies towards child support and alimony, etc. Women somehow are still called good. So when women ask, where are all the good men? Well, they're right here. We've been here the whole time, and we're just as greedy and selfish and self-interested as you. And since goodness, as I've stated, is irrelevant to one's gender, then I suppose that makes us the good men you're having so much trouble locating, doesn't it? Now, with that said, let's talk about the video we just watched. One of the defining characteristics you have to remember of traditionalist chivalry is an inability to hold women accountable to adult standards. Now here, if you notice, these men go on this tirade against feminism, and they attempt, as these types usually do, to shame women for their rejection of traditional gender roles. And yet when all is said and done, notice that they still, in no uncertain terms, tell even feminist women that if the situation ever arises, they, meaning these men, supposedly will still sacrifice themselves for the protection of the feminist women they claim to despise. They tell feminist women to hope that if they find themselves in a life or death situation, they'd better hope that there are men like them, these sacrificial white knights that they are, willing to throw their lives away for the benefit of women, any women, even those that they perceive to be the main cause of the disintegration of their traditionalist way of life. And this is one of the many reasons why traditionalism utterly failed to mitigate feminism, and why women can embrace feminism without fear of any repercussion by traditionalism other than outdated, sexual shaming, which doesn't have any effect anymore. There is no disciplinary action that traditionalism can level against women that doesn't revolve around some kind of shaming of promiscuous female behavior. It needs its taboos on female sexuality to function. Along comes a 1960-era sexual revolution that was all about free love and sexual liberation and feminism. And what mechanism was traditionalism left with for controlling female behavior? Well, you guessed it, none. You see, traditionalist conservatives clinging to their way of life as some sort of solution to feminism are comparable to a group of engineers trying to make the argument that the New Orleans levee system should theoretically be able to endure a Category 5 hurricane without flooding post-Hurricane Katrina. The city is in ruins, gentlemen. Your levee system failed. Remember that under traditionalism, women are infants. They're adult children that are expected to live off the labors of others for their entire lives. And this type of environment creates a toxic mindset that assumes women are naturally accepting of traditionalist attempts to infantilize them, and it guarantees traditionalist chivalry be extended to women even if they aren't fulfilling their traditional gender roles, much like a parent is still responsible for the welfare and provision towards his child, even if he's misbehaving in school, or even if he's not following the house rules. And notice then that in order to make up for this, there has to be some kind of external evil boogeyman that caused all of this, that set it all into motion, other than, the chaotic entropy that is the world and reality we live in. Notice how it's the, quote, fault of progressives if men act in accordance with the strongest biological compulsion there is. that being the will to live and survive. You see, if men display a perfectly healthy and normal desire to live, then it's the fault of leftism or progressives or Marxists, as though they've somehow brainwashed men to get this value their own lives. Now, if anything, both progressives and conservatives, both in civilian life, in the civilian sector, and on the battlefield, are the only ones that routinely brainwash men to not value their own lives. It should be noted that these people, these traditionalists on this radio show, are implying that there's something, I'm going to reiterate this, that there's something wrong with men having a healthy and normal sense of self-preservation. The desire to live, when exercised by the male sex, according to these people, must be the result of some nefarious political conspiracy, when the very epitome of selflessness they point to as to what should be the standard of supposedly honorable male behavior, and I'm talking about the Titanic here, had 72% of women surviving with only 50% of children surviving. And these traditionalist conservatives referred to the sinking of the Titanic as, quote, the greatest example of civilized heroism in human history, end quote. So, considering that women saw fit to save themselves over children by a 22% margin, the obvious conclusion to be drawn here about traditionalist culture and custom is that heroism only counts when men are dying, and cowardice never applies when women are in danger of dying. And this type of selective pandering to the female is endemic with traditionalism, since traditionalism has always been and will always be a method for pedestalizing women and placing them in a position of higher value than men. Notice how they said clearly that, quote, they're all for equal opportunities and equal pay for women, but they would also live and die by the credo of women and children first if it ever came to that. So we often criticize feminist women for their cherry-picked versions of equality, but these three gentlemen, who insist on conflating women with the likes of children, also somehow deem them deserving of equal rights and opportunities. These men are all too happy to identify women as their lessers when it benefits women, and as their equals when it benefits women as well. And why is this? Well, because what you're witnessing here is nothing more than a mating strategy. These three, like many traditionalist men, can't get a woman using charm or charisma or personality or looks or what have you, so they offer their little jobs to show what great little providers they can be. And when that doesn't work, they go further and they really scrape the barrel by reminding women, as we're seeing here, that they value themselves so little that they'll actually lay down and die voluntarily for the opposite sex. It's really a communal mating strategy, and a failing one at that. And for good measure, when one of them points out that women who asked for equality should expect it on a lifeboat in an emergency situation, one of these idiots invokes God as a justification for his sexist, misandrist garbage. Remember, men, you have to face your maker, so you'd better die, you disposable nobody. Die for women that wouldn't do the same for you under any circumstance. Perhaps, then, men should invoke God here as well, and tell women that they should treat others the way they would have others treat them, and guilt them into letting men fill up the life rafts whenever a ship is sinking. But of course, that would be hypocritical and cowardly, wouldn't it? And by the way, any Christians listening to this may want to take note here. If you're wondering why men are leaving your corrupt, pussy-worshipping churches in droves, you may want to look at these chivalrous white knight preachers that espouse traditionalism and spend day and night evangelizing the man-up provider role to men while saying absolutely nothing about how women have left their roles. And they're ignoring this, by the way, because they know that women are never going back to these roles. They aren't stupid. They have collection plates to fill. They can't tell their main donors, i.e. women spending men's money, by the way, to go back to a set of customs they rejected 50 years ago. Otherwise, they risk jeopardizing their paychecks, and we certainly can't have that now, can we? As we've talked about at length before, this has a whole heck of a lot to do with female nature and male nature. But it's not that simple, and it's not limited to that. This is partly about freedom. There is a freedom associated with rejecting the obligations society has delineated to you based on your sex or based on any other criteria for that matter. We have, of course, biological realities that affect and compel both genders, to be sure. This is undeniable. But the individual, the free thinker, is in fact genderless. Individualism is the strife and struggle against the animal mind and the hallmark of sentience and science. It is the greatest trait humanity has to offer, and the individualist woman wants it just as bad as a man does. So when one tells women that it is their role to be submissive or demure or virginal, they will only acquiesce if there's something in it for them. Because let's face it, being demure or submissive or virginal sounds like what to you? If we're being honest, of course. It sounds like a bunch of stifling, sexually repressive bullshit for the benefit of weak-willed men holding on to a fantasy of women that never truly existed. Now, if someone was to tell you as a man, and more importantly as an individual, that you have to be submissive, demure, and virginal, most men, myself included, will tell them to go fuck themselves, and I don't blame women for taking the opportunity to do the same thing. Conversely, I don't want some sanctimonious traditionalist radio host telling me that I'm not a real man unless I embrace a cold, hypothermic death for some woman I don't even care about. Women rejected society's attempt to impose an unnatural sexual rule set on them, and now men are about to do the same. We reject, as individuals and as men going their own way, any attempt to shame us back in line, or pretending that traditionalism isn't thinly veiled misandry, and the imposition on us of a civilizational self-interest edict will result in more men embracing this mentality than ever before. You see, the way women took to feminism, it's going to be the way men take to the rejection of society's expectations of them. It's going to be on a subconscious level, and it's going to be organically mediated. Do the math, people. The only thing inhibiting the precipitation of what is already underway in the form of a marriage strike is that the fantasy is still somewhat sustainable. Wait till it becomes impossible for a man to raise a family on his income alone. You think the marriage and birth rates are low now. And this all boils down and comes back to one main, that the state is the ultimate alpha male. And it was women who made that distinction and made that possible. Women along with feminism and men acquiescing to it. It's ironic when you think about it that the most powerful male, the state, is devoid of actual identity. He is a eunuch alpha male, pure utility, no individual identity. The symbolism, gentlemen, shouldn't be lost on you, that when women elected the ultimate provider, protector, and alpha male, he would come in this purely utilitarian form. This is the overarching view that women have of men, unfortunately, and it's not a coincidence that across the board, across any cultural demographic, the higher a nation's IQ is, the less children women will have. If you go to any affluent suburban region of any major American city, or any major Western city, or any major city, period, and then go to an urban matriarch ghetto in that same city, and then tell me which one of these two regions are producing more children, the answer will invariably be the uneducated single mother that is producing more children. The more intelligent and educated a nation's women are, the less children they will have. And as an aside, I'll now comment on the general dim-wittedness that I've observed of the traditional homemaker housewife. And there's a reason I'm doing this. It's not just to kind of insult these women. But if you'll notice, these women aren't exactly the smartest people around. And honestly, when you really give it some thought, how could they be? Think about this. To whatever degree we can examine intelligence, generally speaking, we clearly can't deny that intelligence is to some degree, and very possibly a significant degree, something that is cultivated. It's why we see homeschooled students excelling compared to their peers, even in genetically homogeneous populations. There is latent intelligence that you're born with, that is heritable, and there is intelligence gained through experience and environment. And to remember what Esther Villiers said, and I'm just paraphrasing here, she said in her book, The Manipulated Man, and I'll put the quote up on the screen, but I'm just going to paraphrase, that a woman whose only aim is to use her femininity in exchange for provision from a man undergoes a process of brain atrophy, a permanent intellectual surrender of sorts. So please forgive this little tangent, but we have to ask ourselves, what critical thinking skills, what intelligence can a man's progeny inherit from a woman who has resigned herself to the scuttling of her own intellect to become what amounts to, I guess, a broodmare prole? The more a child inherits critical thinking abilities, the better. Thus, it would make sense that a child's intelligence, to whatever degree it can be cultivated and improved on, is at least partially contingent on both parents having cultivated their own intelligence. They say necessity is the mother of invention. And I'll add to that by saying that intelligence is the father of invention. What does a homemaker woman who has resigned herself to exchanging sex to have her bills paid know of necessity? And with that said, what can she know of intelligence? How are men not shortchanging their children by reproducing with these lifelong dependents? What intellectual contributions are these women capable of passing along to their progeny? I'm going to reiterate, The more intelligent, the higher the IQ, and the higher the degree of education, and consequently employability of a nation's women, the less children those women will have. And this is merely another indication of what we all really know. That is, that by and large, women see children as a means to an end for securing provision from men. Women that are capable of providing for themselves no longer want to go through the inconvenience of producing children to get their bills paid. And this sentiment, taken to its idealized conclusion, created female dependence on the state, the ultimate alpha male, who is in fact invisible and de-individualized and ready and willing to extract monies from individual men, as well as punish them when they can't render it or when they step out of line. I'm going to say it again. The state is the ultimate white knight, and these three white knights can't compete, and they're mad that women have replaced them with either the state for the purposes of provision or the quote alpha male for the purposes of reproduction. That's why you get a lot of these people whining that women only choose thugs or what have you. Notice how the anger is directed at the men. Women only choose bad boys. The anger is directed at the men. If these men are such degenerates and such scumbags and such assholes, what does that say about the women choosing them? And what does that say about the fact that you still want to court them? Stop complaining about so-called bad boys or thugs or what have you, and look at the real problem here, that women don't, under their natural devices, tend towards attraction, towards provider, beta, towards traditionalist providers. And that's why your philosophy and worldview and customs that have lasted, a couple thousand years is falling apart now, because for the first time, women do have the option to go without. They don't need it anymore. Traditionalism, and I hate using this language, but for lack of a better word, is a method, a worldview, a civilizational setup designed to allow beta males to reproduce. These three men, and it's easy to discern really if you look at their body language and how they call men boys for refusing to don the same sacrificial yoke they've wrapped around their necks. You can easily tell what their agenda is. It's passive-aggressive competition for mating access. It's trying to convince women that they would sacrifice their lives for them, and it's pretty pathetic, actually. And I seriously doubt that any of these chest thumpers would actually sacrifice their lives for women in an emergency situation. They just have a vested interest in projecting that image. And then these three have the nerve to say, and I'm going to read the quote word for word. They say, quote, "Whenever women have insisted on absolute equality with men, they have invariably wound up with the dirty end of the stick. What they are and what they can do makes them, get this, superior to men. And their proper tactic is to demand special privileges all the traffic will bear. They should never settle merely for equality. For women, equality is a disaster." End quote. So, pay attention to the language of these types. They first begin by laying out the implication that women, the inferiors that they are victims of equality by telling us that when they pursue it, they wind up with the dirty end of the stick. Then in the same sentence, and this is pure Orwellian doublethink here, they then tell us that, quote, "what they are and what they can do makes them superior to men." You see how that works? According to these groveling white knights, women are superior to men, yet can't handle equality with their male inferiors. I mean, honestly, think about the definition of doublethink, according to Orwell's definition. Think about how these men, in the span of a sentence, displayed a belief in two completely contradictory ideas and genuinely believe them, knowing they contradict each other. And this, gentlemen, is what we're dealing with. This is what traditionalism is, and this is what feminism is. It's an ability to contradict every observable truth about women, summoning up one truth when it's convenient, burying that truth when it's not, and replacing it with another truth when it's convenient as well. Why do you think these traditionalist conservative imbeciles say women and children first, thereby equating women to children, and then they say this? And it's funny that we've been instructed by traditionalist conservative forces within the men's movement to believe that only feminists or leftists or what have you put forth claims of female superiority. What then are three right-wing traditionalist conservatives doing touting these claims of the superiority of the fairer sex? I thought that was only feminists and leftists that talk about female supremacy. And to claim that somebody is superior is the same thing as female supremacy. Make no mistake about it. If you look carefully at how their faces light up when he's reading this quote, it's clear how these tradcon types revel in reverence towards the female. The quote clearly states that women are superior to men. Superior. And these tradcon dullards, upon hearing this, have these euphoric Kool-Aid smiles plastered on their faces, and this is what really needs to be combated. It's not just feminism, it's not just leftism. As I've said before, these are symptoms of a wider disease, a systemic disease. What needs to be addressed is the tendency for men to accept and invite gynocentrism as normal, acceptable behavior. Remember that traditionalists such as these men aren't anti-feminist for the sake of men, but only because the state, along with the blessings of their very own women, have usurped their position as king of the castle, with the woman-child dullard we so often see in these traditional setups as his subject. Traditionalist men such as these are apparently unaware that if you coat male and female attraction within this veneer of provision for sex and children exchange agreements, you will ultimately have to deal with a central governing authority that provides more than you ever could. These people act surprised that feminism happened, but for the life of me, I can't understand why. Things couldn't have gone any other way. The traditionalist custom of creating an infantilized female populace who wants an authority figure to take care of everything for her, a daddy figure. This creates a pliable, acquiescent female population, and because traditionalism is ultimately pinged to female interests, these three idiots must now adhere to their very own form of political correctness of their own doing, in that while they equate women to children with their women and children's first mantra, they also must make the concession that women can and will vote now. So essentially they're trapped in their servitude to the female, yet unable to render any authoritative motion against her. Because her suffrage has allowed her to now guard against the failures of individual husbands and providers via taxation of the everyman. The failure of traditionalism was a self-fulfilling prophecy. It couldn't have gone any other way. So if you pay attention to what these gentlemen are saying, you'll notice what I've pointed out before and I've talked about extensively on this channel, and that is the tendency for traditional conservative types and men in general to ceremonialize their own disposability. And what I mean by this is the oft-repeated sentiment in society and even in men's rights circles of men being fine with their disposability, and that the only real problem is that society and women don't recognize it or reward it anymore. It's, as Stardust put it, it's disposability light. And I'm here to say that no, that this man, at least, doesn't want a pat on the head like I'm some little boy for making myself disposable. Thinking men that understood the deepest motivations of other men, and those other men are the dynamos powering what we refer to in modernity as the great seething masses of blue pill males. Thinking men have throughout history used these blue pill men, the ones that ceremonialize their disposability, as cannon and work fodder for thousands of years, and in fact, it was one of these thinking men, Napoleon, who said, quote, "A soldier will fight long and hard for a bit of colored ribbon." End quote. Think about what that means for a second. Dwell on that for a second. That, my friends, that quote encapsulates entirely what I mean to convey by the concept of ceremonializing one's own disposability. The universal male, butchered for millennia on spears and swords and now tanks and weapons and guns and bombs, is happy with a ribbon pinned on his chest, which couldn't possibly have costed more than a few red cents. And for what? So he can bask in societal approval. They might call him brave, but in fact what he really is a coward who's never been comfortable in his own skin a day in his life. That's what this need for validation is all about. Most men aren't happy and truly at peace unless society or women or the state have given him what is essentially the same little golden star-shaped stickers children are given in kindergarten. Now, if you go to the Titanic Memorial, you'll find a commemorative statue stating the following words: "To the brave men who perished in the wreck of the Titanic on April 15th, 1912. They gave their lives that women and children might be saved." I find it ironic that the statue, while being almost certainly produced and installed by men, is signed as being, quote, "erected by the women of America." But what one should specifically take note of is that this statement, to any thinking man, should immediately convey a stark truism. How does the hypothetical statement, and this is purely hypothetical, "To the brave black folks who perished in a random shipwreck, they gave their lives so that whites and children may live," signed white folks of America, or vice versa, replace it with any other racial groups you want, how does that sound to you? Well, of course it sounds like a statement of vitriolic supremacy. It sounds horrific because it is horrific, and it's horrific because it's saying, to the thinking man at least, that your life as a man is of less value than that of a woman, and that these self-hating traditionalist imbeciles are more than happy to celebrate this mentality and denigrate men that have the critical thinking skills to say that they value their lives as much as women value theirs, and we will not relinquish them for your poisonous anachronisms and traditionalist customs that place female lives in a higher value set than that of men. So to these fools who ask, well, what does a traditionalist even mean? I don't know what it means. Well, I hope you watch this video real good, because it highlights everything wrong with traditionalism whilst defining it all in one salivating gynocentric festival of anti-male sexism thinly disguised under a veneer of disingenuous, fake pro-male adulation. Here's a novel thought. I don't want to be disposable, period. You see, here's the fundamental difference between myself and those that are in the men's movement for their respective disingenuous family values agendas. I'm not going to tell you that everything would be okay again if women in society merely started to appreciate men's sacrifices again. I'm here to urge you not to make those sacrifices anymore, because it's those sacrifices and society's and women's feelings of expectation and entitlement to those sacrifices and men's willingness to make those sacrifices that spawn the gynocentric status quo of feminism and its predecessor traditionalism. The Titanic Memorial is nothing but a golden star sticker for male adults, and where a kindergartner gets a golden star for coloring in the lines, men have to potentially annihilate themselves for it. And what do I mean by that? To put it in perspective, I'll remind you that none of us know what lies beyond this life. Now, perhaps there's something after, perhaps there isn't. We can't prove either to be the case. And so sacrificing your life for another human being means that you are running the risk of forfeiting your unique consciousness, everything that makes you you, your synapses, your thoughts, the unique collection of thoughts and memories that will only exist once in all of recorded history and henceforth. And these traditionalist white knight monkeys have the nerve to sit up on their little TV show and try to shame men via their defunct societal expectations to give up something that precious for women we don't even know. That's all I gotta say for now. Stay tuned.